This is meant to be interactive. This is one of these trainings where we're going to talk about a lot of different ideas. I'm not going to tell you in a lot of these areas how to do it, the best way to do it, what the law is. We'll get to that later in the day, some of the laws and things. But most of the morning is going to be spent just talking about ideas and different ways of being able to look at leadership roles, supervisor responsibilities, and those sorts of things. So do chime in and ask questions, because we'll get a lot more out of it that way. And so with that, how many of you have actually gone to school to learn how to be a supervisor? Right? You all just were the best, hardest working person in your department at the time that there was an opening, and boom, you got promoted to a supervisor, right?
Or you couldn't do anything else.
yeah, they had to put you faster in the supervisor spot. Good. And we'll talk about how supervisors, how we select and choose who our leaders are going to be later in the day too. So we'll be ready for that. To get started though, I just want to get a real good idea. So if we go around the room real quick, I won't remember your name, give it to me anyway. What department you're working for, how many people you supervise, and what your number one frustration with supervising is. And I'll start. So Johnny Miller, I have 4 people that report directly to me. Over the years, I've had as many as 170 report to me. So I'm out to pasture too now. And my biggest frustration with supervising is having to do performance appraisal. Even though I teach it and I'm getting better at it, it's still my number one frustration. So let's start over here.
I'm just an interim librarian right now, so I don't supervise anybody. But I don't like the performance evaluation, so I don't like that either. So I don't know yet.
Great.
I'm Camille Thomas, and I'm the Cleveland librarian. And I have one person that I supervise. And yeah, I'm not a fan of the performance evaluation either. But.
I'm Cindy Bowerman, Green River librarian. The janitor and the assistant. I think it's doing the scheduling sometimes around all of us, or around 2 of us.
I'm Colleen Murdoch. I'm a librarian, and I have 2. Probably it's hard because I'm thinking one way and maybe they're thinking another.
Bonnie Day, Elmo Library, 2 people, and the hardest thing for me is to tell them about something they need to improve on or they're not doing and need to do it.
Becky Jukes, Huntington librarian, and I supervise 2 people, and I'm living with Bonnie.
I'm Marian George, and I do the Emory Library, supervise 2 people, and the same is, I think it's kind of hurting somebody's feelings, and will they take the wrong way, and being the firm, and this is what I want, so.
I'm Roxanne Jensen. I supervise all them and their staff. So, one of the hardest things to do, I think, is communicating and keeping, communicating with what, everybody's got different personalities and stuff, but communicating what is necessary for both the library, the county, trying to keep that all into balance.
Darshelle Leroy, I run the rec center, and my biggest thing is probably maybe people not taking pride in their work, not doing it the best they can, and over a company. I'm Crisco, assessor. I supervise 3 people.
Probably just having, when you have to tell them they need to do a little bit better or something like that.
Travis Lynn, I supervise 2 guys over maintenance in the road department. I guess guess I don't like the responsibility of being a supervisor.
Amen, brother.
I'm Matthew Humphrey, and I'm over one person, and I agree with Mary. His name is Teresa.
I'm Katie Van Wagner. I supervise the lifeguards at the pool. I am 18, and my biggest problem is they're teenagers, and their mindset is completely different from this. So doing a performance evaluation on them, a lot of the stuff on the performance evaluation doesn't even apply to them. Like, they're not going to sit down and read the policy book. They don't read their homework, let alone the back.
So as teenagers, they're different because they act more mature than the 50-year-olds in the road department.
Same.
I'm Dennis Fuller. I'm a crew leader. One of my biggest frustrations is that I'm not a supervisor, I'm a crew leader. Been here 37 years. I manage 3 employees. And probably my biggest frustration is contractors who are charging the county exorbitant rates just to visit us. They charge $1,500 just to say hello to these people. And so it's pretty frustrating to me to have to deal with that.
Brooke Smith, Sheriff's Office. Depends on the day how many I supervise. 6. And personality conflicts between the crews.
I'm Gil Conover, Commissioner. We have a couple secretaries that report to us. And in my former life, I supervised 118 people, union and non.
Glenn Center County Commissioner. I'm still trying to learn how many people we're supervising. And Dennis was just being nice. I'm his worst headache.
Ray Peterson, Public Lands Department. Supervise a part-time assistant and then 8 or 9, a board of 8 or 9 volunteers, and probably frustrations with working with volunteers. Great bunch of people, real good, but a different set of frustrations there. Probably a little harder to have accountability because they're not subject to some of the personnel policies and stuff. So it's a different animal.
Captain Thomas with the Sheriff's Office, approximately 30 people. Keeping everybody positive with the way the court systems and everything are going, so we can stay proactive, productive to the county and the citizens. It's getting pretty tough.
Sure.
Greg Funk. Probably my biggest frustration is remembering everything I got to get done. So.
Yeah.
I'm Shannon Hott. I'm Aquatic Center Director. Back to Kaylee. I supervise 25 people, depending on what time of year. Sometimes we need more or something. She takes care of teenagers. I don't have frustration in the lifeguards that much. We have a great staff, but my frustration is supervising the public. In today's society, this is my anthem, slogan. Anybody's ever talked to me much knows people want what they want, when they want, how they want it, and they don't want to be told no. And if you tell them no, that don't matter. They still gonna do it. So that's my frustration. Even when it's safety oriented, that's where I get in trouble.
Colby Hunt, Emory County Road Department. I'm over two guys down there. I don't have any problems because I'm a good supervisor.
Justin Trimble, County Road. I'm over 20 people, and probably my frustration is getting everything done. Not having enough time to do it.
Wade Nielsen, road supervisor. 25 people. My biggest problem is probably cold.
Yeah.
Stretching the money.
Being efficient. A lot of this is being efficient. You gotta be to get things done. Way in back.
Josie Stilson, treasurer. I have 2 people. My biggest frustration is probably just with retirements. They're both new, so just how time-consuming training is.
Brenda Tuttle, clerk auditor. Probably personalities, trying to get everybody to work together.
Good.
Jeff Guyman, IT, 2, and I'd say time to get everything done.
Yeah. Great. We got one just walked in. Your name, department, how many you supervise, and what's your biggest frustration with being a supervisor?
My biggest what?
Frustration with being a supervisor.
I'm Robbie with the Sheriff's Department. I supervise the jail and dispatch. There's 8 of them. And my biggest frustration, yeah, probably shift coverage.
All right. Good. Well, so now we've all talked in front of the group, so nobody's apprehensive to bring something up when they have a question, right? And I'm glad that there were a lot of different questions or issues that you want to talk about today. One of the things about being a supervisor is employees deal with objects. You know, they're changing the plow blade, they're locking the doors, they're bringing meals, they're shelving books, you know, that thing, those sorts of things, which in the end run is easy compared to what supervisors have to deal with, because supervisors have to deal with people. And that's a whole different game than when you were an employee and you dealt with tasks. Tasks are much easier than dealing with people. So today we're going to start out talking a little bit about leadership and how to deal with people. Because that's the new responsibility you took on when you became a supervisor that no one ever trained you for. Hopefully you've had some intuitive skills that you were chosen for your position for, and if not, we can build on them today and going forward with some of the ideas that we'll talk about today. So as far as your expectations, we went through this, you know, what would you like to talk about by giving me your biggest frustration? I think we covered that, and your biggest leadership challenges. Based on what you guys had to say, I think we're going to cover it pretty well. We're going to start out with just an introduction to leadership, and you know, some of the things that make a good leader, some of the things that make a poor leader, so that you can think about, because we all have the ability to improve ourselves, especially when we have a change in what the expectations of us are. So a lot of this will be some introspection to see which of these things am I doing that makes me a good leader, and which of these things am I doing that I should probably try and curb to be a better leader. We'll talk about performance management, which is telling people how they're doing. You know, over the years, that's been through a performance appraisal, and so we'll talk about that and how to get through that process less painfully. We'll talk about performance counseling.
Johnny, can
yes.
we just have a timeout for a minute so we can pull the projector back so it is bigger?
Sure.
Because I'm sure they can't see that in the back.
Just wait. This way's the only one struggling.
Without fluttering.
All right, that's both age discrimination and Americans with Disabilities Act discrimination. Yeah, it wasn't you. It was the projector.
Better.
Great. So we'll go on to performance counseling, which is telling these people that they need to do a little bit better. A couple of people had that issue. It's tough to let someone know you can do better than you're doing. So we'll talk about how you go through that process. Then we'll talk about conflict resolution when they don't get along. Either two employees don't get along, or someone's not getting along with you and they're angry and they're upset. How many of you had to deal with that with an employee? Ooh. I thought you were all really kind and friendly people here in every county. So we'll cover that one. Then the afternoon we'll get a little bit easier again. We'll talk about diversity and how having people with different ideas is a good thing. We'll talk about, we covered discrimination and harassment to get that checked off the list because we need to be doing harassment training a couple of times a year is what the attorneys are recommending now. The EEOC wants to see you doing. I'm not sure why that put in there, but we'll cover employment law. So we're going to hit a couple of the, the discrimination and harassment very closely, but then we'll just cover a lot of other employment laws that as supervisors you need to at least be aware of. We're not going to make you experts in it, but you need to be aware that these laws exist. And then we'll round out the day with talking about recruitment, hiring, and orientation. And for most of you, the orientation will be the part that you'll be more involved in, more so than the hiring process, but still important. Does that sound good? Okay, so buckle up. It'll be a long day. Try and make it as entertaining as possible. But please help me out with that. All right. So, how many of you have found that your life skills up until the point that you became a supervisor did not prepare you entirely for doing that job? You've had to learn some new tricks, right? Even us old dogs have to learn new tricks. And so we need to be creative. So for those of you who have pen and paper at your desk, you'll draw this on your paper real quick. And if you don't, just try and do it in your head on the screen. But what the idea is that you're going to draw 4 connected lines, like that, only 4. Connect all the dots, but never pass through the same dot twice. And some of you were at my training a couple years ago, right? Tough, right? You know why it's tough? Because I boxed you. You got to think outside the box. If you let them, I didn't say you couldn't go outside of the dots. You just had to connect them. So if you think outside the box and go beyond the borders that I put here, it's easy. 4 connected lines go through every single dot, never passes through the same dot twice. So that's a lot of what we're going to talk about today. Some ideas that maybe you've never heard of, some ideas that you maybe heard of and thought were crazy, but we'll talk through them and maybe some of these different ideas will help you connect all the dots of your supervisory role. Okay. All right, let's go to performance management. What we're looking for in performance management is continuous improvement of our employees, that they get better and better as the years go on. Because shouldn't we expect that? They do the same job year after year. They should be getting better at it as we go, so that we can be more efficient, so that we can meet our budgets, so that we can get the work done on time, so that we can deal with the changes that the legislature makes, that now we've got more to do. All of that is important, and we get to that through goal setting and making sure that we're constantly looking for them, setting goals to do more and more. Longfellow had this quote, "Judge ourselves by what we feel capable of, while others judge us by what we have already done." That's a good quote when we're talking about doing a performance management review, right? That it doesn't matter what you tell me you did during the year. What you did during the year is what I care about as a supervisor. And that's what I'm going to judge you on. Not what you tell me you can do, not what you tell me you're going to do, but what you actually did. Very similar idea from Emerson, what you do speaks so loud that I cannot hear what you say. And how many of you have been in that trap in a performance appraisal where the employee is telling you that they are the best, most biggest shining star in Emory County that's ever existed, and you have a totally different idea? The back row is going to be big confused today. But again, for employees to understand that the people that work for you to understand that they need to show you their value, not talk about it, not just be able to tell you. Our objectives here today are we need to understand a performance management system. We're going to look at leadership values. We're going to understand the power of goal setting. We're going to know supervisor responsibilities. We're going to conduct an effective performance review. So we'll start with some of the theory, and we'll get right down to how do you actually perform that performance review successfully. Okay. So performance management system, the basics of that are that we're going to rate employees on the factors that are applicable to their job. Many of you have probably at some point in your life used a performance appraisal form that was super general and really didn't speak to the things that your employee does, and you're supposed to rate their performance, but the performance form doesn't speak to what they do. That's a real frustration. So we need to look at that, make sure that we're catching that or allowing for that during the process, whether the form allows us to or not. We still need to hit that. We need to provide feedback to employees on performance highlights, both positive and negative. We need to document the employee's strengths and development needs, because everybody can get better, right? Determine short-term and long-term potential next moves for career development interests, because every employee may think that what their goal is to be the best at the job that they're doing now. And that's good, but hopefully we can get them thinking beyond that and looking at that there's other opportunities in life. Not always just going to be in the position that I'm in now. I could have been the very best part-time file room person at the third-party administrator that ever existed. But I looked beyond that. I went from starting out as a part-time file room person to the CEO. Because I didn't mind when my supervisors told me that I could do better. And I believed them, and they gave me that, sometimes, even though it was difficult to hear the areas that I wasn't doing as well in that I need to improve upon or take a class on, it drove me to prove myself and put me in the position I'm in today. And every one of your employees is able to do that, even though some of them don't show it at all. It seems like they don't care about their job a bit. And that speaks to the importance of setting goals. We need to establish agreements between the employee and you on future performance standards, and setting goals, asking them to do more is just an expectation of the job. I mean, in government, we're constantly asked to do more. I mean, they started Monday dreaming up the next set of new rules that we need to live by down at the legislature, and there'll be more work for us come the end of the legislative session. There's no question about that. And so every employee that's in government work needs to understand that we need to continue to get better and more efficient at what we're doing. We encourage employees to take responsibility for their future performance and their future progress. And we provide objective basis for performance standards. So we're going to set out, here's what I'm going to be looking at to determine whether or not you're getting the job done over the course of the next year, between now and the next performance appraisal. So we'll look at how we do all of those things. And of course, we tie those individual goals to the goals of the organization. Why would we set a goal for an individual that has nothing to do with what the goal of our department is, right? Again, we want the employee to understand what's expected of them, know that their performance is going to be measured, that we're not just going to look at the last week or two before the performance appraisal. We really are going to judge the performance all year long, and it will be measured against the goal that was set. We're going to have a clear, objective, job-oriented performance goals that are linked to the department's goals. One of the things that I've done over the years, I've used so many different forms and formats to do performance appraisal. I mean, it went from everything from the 1 to 5 scale with 30 or 40 different areas that you had to judge them 1 through 5, to the very touchy-feely, how do you feel about this employee, and you go to every other employee and ask them how they feel about that employee, and you go to, you do the whole 360-degree review. Those all worked to a certain extent, but bringing some of those ideas into a format where you're really focusing on what that person's job is, I've come to the point where my performance appraisal is I sit down with the job description. What defines their job better than the job description? So at least part of my performance appraisal, irregardless of the form that my board has me fill out, is walking through their job description and talking about, are they meeting the tasks appropriately? Can they do better with each task that's on their job description? Because that's clear, job-oriented performance goals that are linked to the goals of the department, right? Or they wouldn't be on the job description. This also helps you get those job descriptions updated, rewritten, in better shape. This one, a lot of scientists and sociologists will say that people want to learn, they yearn to learn, they want to do better. Sometimes it just doesn't feel like that, right? But deep down, people do want to do better. And so we'll try and feed that for them. We'll see if this is going to work this morning. Darn it. You guys want to watch a video? Well, I'm setting this one up. I'll see if I can get. I had another video too of a guy that he's now a famous performance management consultant, and the video that I had of him, and I couldn't find it anymore, it's not on YouTube anymore, was him talking about his very first performance appraisal with an engineering firm, and he pulls out of his pocket that performance appraisal because he's kept it his entire career, because his supervisor was very clear with him that he was not making the grade. And he talks about how that has been so useful to him his entire career.
You seem rather chip before Monday. Today is a good day. It's my performance review. Wait a minute. You're excited about the performance review?
My next meeting is a one-on-one. I have to deliver a performance review. That's not necessarily a bad thing. It's with Matt. Oh, I can see why you're so depressed.
Man, I'm stoked about this one. Because last time Melanie gave me kind of a bad review.
Last time I gave him an extremely negative review.
What exactly did she say? You know, mumbo-jumbo manager speak.
I couldn't have been more clear.
Like needing a little touch-up here and there.
His appearance was sloppy, he was passive and unmotivated.
Maybe learn some more stuff.
And the quality of his work was completely substandard.
And we talked about my future.
I also said that I didn't see much of a future for him.
Dude, you have to read between the lines, but she was majorly hinting that I could go places.
I don't think he's gonna make it to the end of the year anyway.
With a little spit and polish, no big deal. So that's what I did. Got myself some spit and polish. Buddy, you're looking at Mr. Improved.
If anything, he's gotten worse. I don't know which is more objectionable, his social deficiencies or his technical incompetencies.
I mean, I busted my hump this last year. I even took some night classes at the community college. Well, I can see why you're so enthused about things. It's more than that. I think I'll finally get that promotion I deserve. And believe me, with a new baby on the way, I could use all the cash I could get.
I'm putting Matt on probation, and that means no yearly bonus, but fortunately I hear his wife has a good job.
Especially with my wife losing her job and all.
Sorry to hear about that, mate. Tell you what, you give me a call after the review and we'll celebrate over lunch or something.
Cheerio.
Well, call me for lunch later. I have a feeling you're gonna need to take a break. Well, Matt, are you ready?
You bet. Now, I'm jumping the gun a little bit here, I know. And maybe it's just nerves because my wife lost her job and all. But you'll see I deserve that promotion.
Promotion?
Yes. And I have you to thank. You know that little pep talk last time? And with being a new daddy and all. Anyway, I'm just so excited to hear what you have to say.
Facing a crucial conversation, Vital Smarts can help.
Okay, so that's supposed to be a funny video, but for some of us who have been there, that's not so funny, is it? That's tough to deal with that situation. Here's this employee that really thinks they've been doing a great job and they're expecting big things, and that isn't at all acceptable.
Good morning!
Not time for TED Talk. So there was the other video where the guy was really appreciative that his supervisor was very clear with him, let him know you got to make the grade or you're gone, and it drove him to be much better, very successful, and this guy apparently got the same message but didn't hear it very clearly. So with those of you who said you had difficulty with the performance appraisal and telling people that they need to do better, how many of you think you might have given them the management mumbo jumbo because you were nervous about that situation? I think we've all probably done that at some point or another. We weren't clear enough because it was uncomfortable.
It's the truth. Also, the frustration for me is I don't feel like the evaluation form that we have actually pertains to what their jobs are, especially when we're evaluating our assistants versus our janitors. And it's the same form for both, but it doesn't really seem to apply to what we do.
Right.
So I did like where it said in there that they are, that you want to cover their job description with them. I think that's a great way to kind of balance that out, maybe.
What I found is by first going through the job description so that they know this is your job, what you were hired for, you know that this is what you're asked to do. Let's go through all of that. Now let's take what our assessment of you meeting all those job description requirements, let's translate that over into the form that we have that we need to turn in for management to look at your performance. Do we use performance appraisals in Emery County for salary adjustments? Anything of that sort? Okay. Because that's a big difference. I mean, I know that's a huge hesitation at employers where this employment or performance appraisal is used, and that's the primary basis for whether or not someone gets a merit increase or not. Really tough for a supervisor because these are people that you work with, play with, have kids that play together with, and now you're being honest with them, which means they're not getting an increase in their salary this year. That makes it really tough. So when we disconnect those two, it makes it a little less difficult. one of the reasons I spent so much time on the performance management as the guy who runs the indemnity pool, because anytime the county gets sued, I'm the guy that writes the checks out of the fund to pay for the attorneys that have to defend the county and what they did with discipline. And for years and years, my big problem with employment law claims is the supervisor comes to HR and says, I've had enough, Henry's gotta go. He's never done his job well, and he's like retired in place. And not only is he not getting his job done, but he's like a cancer in the department. He's constantly mouthing off to the other employees and getting them negative about the county. We just need him gone. So HR takes the recommendation of the supervisor. They go through the termination process. Then the claim comes to me, and we hire an attorney, and the attorney starts doing depositions. And what do we hear on the first day of depositions and in the courtroom? The plaintiff's attorney has a copy of every performance appraisal for that employee for the last 25 years. And what kind of scores did they get on that performance appraisal? 10s. All the way, every year. Because everybody gets 10s, because otherwise I can't, I want to be a friend to the people who work for me. I'm not going to downgrade them and not let them get their raise, so I'm giving them a 10. And so what happens at that point? Henry comes back to work, feeling emboldened that he can keep doing what he's not been doing for the last few years, and there's nothing you can do about it. And you pay him all the back pay, you got a free vacation on the county. So this is super important. You need to be honest with these performance appraisals, because they're the only way that you get to a point where an underperforming employee can be disciplined. And certainly terminated, right? Because we'll get there at some point with an employee. All right, so let's look again some more at the objectives of goal setting. I'm going to use this SMARTS concept to develop goals. I see a lot of variations of it. It's one method. It doesn't have to be your method, but I think the concepts here are what's important to think about when you are defining somebody's goals for their next year. First of all, we need to be specific about the goal. You need to do better. What does that mean? You need to be very specific about what goals we're going to set, and we'll have some examples coming up. It needs to be measurable. There needs to be a way of determining, did they meet the goal or not? You need to do better. Well, I worked 2 hours of overtime, or 2 hours extra during the year. That's better than it was, so I met the goal. No, that isn't what I meant. You need to make sure that they understand how you're going to measure them meeting that goal. It needs to be attainable. Don't make them something that they can never get to, or you know is unreasonable to ask for in a year's time. They need to be results oriented, because why set a goal for someone that doesn't create a result that's positive for the county? You're just spinning their wheels and yours. And it should be time phased. So it should be something that there is a calendar, that they know that, 3 months out I expect you to be here with this goal. 6 months out I expect you to be at this level with the goal. And by the end of the year, we will have met it. So that they don't wait until 2 weeks before the performance appraisal and look back at the last year's performance appraisal and say, oh, I have that goal. I got 2 weeks to try and take care of this. They're never going to do it, right? And then stretching is the last part of the SMARTS concept. That goals should be set that make that employee better than they've been. No reason to set a goal to keep doing what you're doing. That's your goal. Not a lot of purpose to that, right? So here's some examples for each one. So a task-oriented, specific goal would be Joe will be assigned to work on the next cost proposal in November to begin training in this area. Very specific. Not just that I need you to get involved with cost proposals. This is much more specific than that. So then the measurement would be, and I'm using this one down here, did Joe participate in the cost proposal? If he didn't, you told him he needed to be getting involved with one by November. Now it's January or February, you're doing the performance appraisal and didn't get it done. You know what the measurement was. Is it attainable? Did Joe have the opportunity to participate in a cost proposal, and was there an experienced person to work with him? So, yeah, if you tell him that he needs to be involved in a cost proposal, but no cost proposals get sent out during the year, that goal wasn't attainable. So you need to consider that. The result-oriented, Joe assisted in producing a quality cost proposal and is now able to develop a cost proposal without assistance. That's good results, right? That's what we were headed for. So that's how you would identify that on the performance appraisal, is that way. It was time phased, the time frame was specified in the goal. He was going to do it by November, and it was met within that time frame. And it was a stretch for him because he had never worked on a cost proposal before, but that was a skill for him to learn if he wanted to move up in the department. So now you've got another person that can do that.
What would you rate him from 1 to 5?
As far as meeting this goal, I'd give him a 4, unless he really, if you didn't expect him to be able to do it on his own by the end of the year, I'd give him a 5.
So if you thought he would struggle, you'd give him a 5, but if he did well, you'd give him a 4?
No, I'm saying if he didn't get to that point where he did do it, he was involved, but he didn't. He's not at that point yet where he could do it on his own. Then he'd be, 4 out of 5. But he really got there. He learned how to do it to the extent that he's ready to do it on his own. So I give him a 5 there. And the 1 through 5s are tough too, aren't they? Because everybody hates, I know my kids, they will not accept a B. It's like under the unacceptable to them. It's like C is average. If you're doing well, you're a C. You're making the grade. You're doing the job. But that's the idea behind the grading system anyway, right?
This reminds me of teachers that they'll never give an A in any of their classes. So some kids in college are really sucker.
So would you say he met the expectation or didn't meet the expectation?
I'd say if this is true, that he's now ready to do it on his own, that he's met the expectation. He met that goal. So you'd set a new goal for next year. Next year, Joe, I want you to do your own cost proposal in the first half of the year. And by the end of the year, I'd like you to bring in another person and show them how to do a cost proposal. Just to keep them moving. Once you get them moving, that's an important piece, especially for some of these people that you never thought would get involved in their job. If you can start getting them moving with a small goal and you just keep building on it, that's how you build that hunger and that yearning for them to do better. Because even though they don't think that they care, when they get that feeling of having succeeded, they'll want more. Does that make sense? So let's talk about actually doing the performance evaluation, the meeting itself. So how many of you planned for that, beyond just filling out the form to be ready? Do you do much more planning beyond that? Let's talk about some of the things you can do. Yeah. You don't eat breakfast because you know your stomach won't be able to take it. First of all, notify the employee ahead of time. Hey, it's coming up. We're going to do this. So let's be prepared. So think about, what you'd like to talk about when we get to that point. Make sure that you've allowed enough uninterrupted time in a quiet place. Don't let it be in the hallway, right? Because sometimes we get in that trap as a supervisor that, you know, gosh, I got 5 of these to do. I want to knock them out in one day, get it over with. And I've got a million other things to do, so it shouldn't take more than 15 minutes with each person. Well, that's out of a year of that person's career, you're going to give them 15 minutes to let them know how they're doing. Is that really fair to the employee? And this is their chance to get an idea of their worth as an employee of the county. So give them the time that's necessary for it. Gather up your employee review information, and hopefully, and this is something I hope that you'll start doing after today, is you'll pull your notes on that employee out of your desk drawer. How many of you keep notes on your employees of the good things that they do and the not so good things that they do? And keep that yellow legal pad in your that will really help you at the end of the year, because I know when I first started supervising and had to do performance appraisal, I'd walk in there and I would think, you know, this person really needs to improve. And go in and I explain, you know, you really need to do better at being here on time and staying here until the end of the day. Well, what do you mean? Well, you know, you come in late, you leave early, well, when? What day? When did I do that? Well, I know last Tuesday you came in late by about a half hour, and by 3:30 I didn't see you anywhere. The light was on, but you were gone. Okay, Tuesday, when else? You don't want to be in that trap. So if you see that that's an issue, start taking the notes so that when you get to the performance appraisal, you're ready with how to answer the, well, when? What do you mean? Prove it to me, because they'll make you. And that's a really uncomfortable position when you can't prove it to them.
Somebody's got a question?
Yes.
But do you want to wait till the performance evaluation to discuss that with them? Should you discuss it with them as it's happening?
We should, and that's our next section, is the counseling piece. Okay. Yes, because if you catch it earlier and do counseling with them, then by the performance appraisal, you can look at the results. We talked about this earlier in the year. Where are you doing now that we get to the end of the year? We're going to put it on paper that's going to Mary's department. Up until then, it can be between you and them. And these notes, the thing about your supervisor notes, that's not, you don't keep a personnel file. Mary keeps the personnel file. That's the legal file. But you can keep notes about your employees in your desk. And what I like about them is they're not discoverable in court. And you can review them before you testify or give a deposition, but the other side doesn't get to get your notes. Yes, Commissioner.
I don't understand that part. I thought everything that was documented is a legal document.
Not those supervisory notes.
Now, would it be if you had told them about the notes?
Well, yeah, once you start digging them out,
yeah,
and that's why they are your notes to yourself to remind you of things that happened and that.
But as a supervisor, you would want to stop this problem in the beginning,
right?
And not let it go to the next interview meeting. So you'd have to discuss it in your notes.
Right. So if you had that discussion and it was a serious enough issue that it needed to be documented so that it would go in a written, you had a verbal warning, now it's to the written warning stage, and you need documentation to go in the written warning that goes in the personnel file that's documented and discoverable. That's when you dig out your notes and refresh your memory from the notes to write the written warning that goes in the personnel file.
And I might add, there's other ways to do that too. So it would be documented. You put it on your phone, and send that to them, that they've received that. You keep that on your phone, that information is admissible in court.
Well,
and also, there's clocks on our doors up at the Bell County building. We had this incident happen. And it was because of the things that were on the doors. When I had them come in, they had to access the door to come in, and that was when they were on the job. So that was like a time clock for us, and it helped us.
Yeah, some of those things are helpful too. But it's not just, being late for work, it's, they rose their voice to a client at the library. Is that something we do? We try not to do that, right? We don't want to become angry, frustrated, or show our frustration with a client at the library. So you make a note about that. But that's your note, is the way that the courts look at it now. And I hope that they continue to look at it that way. That none of us have perfect memories, but that's what it should be. That's your reminder for the fact that we don't have a perfect memory. It's not, once you share it with Mary in written form, now it's a government document that is still protected, but probably not when we're in discovery in a lawsuit. Okay?
And the other thing that's helpful besides is when you, as a supervisor, when you're discussing this with them, is to have them sign that they acknowledge that you had told them that. Because you can make a note or put something on paper, and they'll say, I didn't know anything about that. And even you can have talked with them and stuff. If you've got your signature that they had read that, then they're aware of it, and then they should make corrections.
Yeah, that could be helpful, that they'll acknowledge in writing that you've had the discussion, so that they don't try and argue that you never told them later down the road. But again, if you have notes that you had that discussion with them about, I'm starting to see a problem with your tardiness. Let me know if you have a problem there, because it's a problem for me. Can't be tardy, okay? And put that in your notes. That now, when they say, "Well, no, you never told me that you had a problem with my tardiness," you're very comfortable in a deposition saying, "I had a discussion with him on April 12th about his tardiness. That was the first time that I said something to him. Then we went to verbal warning in June. Then we went to written warning in July." And the courts are going to be much more, you're going to be much more believable in the court when you're saying, well, referring back to my notes, it was April 12th that I had the first conversation with him. And he's saying, I don't remember them ever talking to me about that. Unfortunately, that's where we get to, folks. How many of you have had to sit in a deposition or give a deposition? Not fun, is it? It takes a real different personality to enjoy being in a deposition. So then we're going to complete an objective evaluation form based on what we know about this employee as part of our planning for the meeting, and we're going to ensure that the performance evaluation is fair and objective, and that the goals are job related. Okay. That's really important. That's how we've planned for the job, or planned for the meeting. When we're meeting with the employee, we open up the meeting by stating the purpose and the format of the meeting, right? This is your annual performance appraisal, and the reason is not because HR makes me do it. The reason is, this is our opportunity to talk about your performance and make sure that you understand how I feel about your performance, and we can talk about some goals that I think would be good for us to set, and talk about your future at Carbon County, or Emory County, excuse me.
You have a good future.
That was on my way here. So we want to make sure that they understand that this is not just a quick, let's get this over with, let's fill in the blanks and get back to work. This is an important thing for them, and it's an important thing for you. It's your opportunity, if you don't take them other times during the year, to make them a better employee than they've been in the past. You want to mention the importance of two-way communication, that this will be a back and forth to some extent, but we'll get to that. You want to review the employee's goals and the process, the goals that you set the last time and the progress towards them. And then we want to review the draft of the completed evaluation form together and probably sign off on it. That's probably the process that you use here, that they sign off, that they, if you have a problem with the employees signing the evaluation, remind them that signing the evaluation is not that they're agreeing to your evaluation of them, it's their acknowledgement that you discussed it. Okay. And that's the way that signature block should read, is I acknowledge that we had this discussion, not I agree with the way that you.
They don't have to sign it, though, do they? If they really don't want to?
They really don't have to, no. But then what the attorneys tell me to have you do is that you sign off, you have two different people sign off that yes, they were in the performance evaluation, you gave them the opportunity to speak, you gave them the opportunity to sign, and they chose not to. Okay, meeting with the employee. We also want to provide room for discussion and agreement of the review content so that we can develop a final version. Because in the video, do you think the supervisor knew that the guy had taken some classes at the community college? Maybe not. So he did something to try and be better that she might not have been aware of. So she'd want to correct her review. If she put on her review that he really hasn't shown any indication of trying to do better, she'd need to change that after discussion. Expect some disagreement and encourage that two-way discussion. And we know when that's coming, right? It's usually not a surprise when we go into a performance appraisal, depending on the individual, that there's going to be some disagreement, right? But it's one of those where you talk back and forth, civilly, respectfully, and then you agree to disagree. But ultimately, you're the supervisor. You need to, and we'll talk about what you need to make sure that they are hearing from you as we go along. So work with the employee to update their performance goals and action plans. So once we've talked about how did they do during the period, we talk about what do we expect from them in the next period. Decide on a date to meet for follow-up assessment of established objectives. So again, especially if you're setting goals, or if there was behavior to be corrected, and this is the method you're using to get that done, you want to set a date, not, okay, we'll see you next year, and let them underperform again for a whole year before you talk about it again. Close the performance evaluation on a positive note. Even if the performance evaluation was a lot of, you didn't meet the objectives, you need to meet the objectives, here's my expectations, we need to get you there, we've got several goals that you need to meet. You can still end on the positive note that I know you got in you. I know you can do this, so let me know what we can do. If you have any ideas of any coursework that you might need, any other assistance that you might need to meet these goals, let's talk about that. Too many supervisors, and one of the slides earlier had both negative and positive things, and too many supervisors have been told over the years, you have to balance it out, and you really want to end up with more positive than negative. So no matter how bad this employee is, you have to have more positive things to say than you do negative things to say. Personally, I'm not a believer in that. If they're underperforming, they're underperforming. And yes, everybody has some positive things, so you want to point those out. And that's why in those notes, don't just put all the problems. When somebody does something above and beyond, and they kind of surprise you, put that in your notes too, because now you can use that in the performance appraisal. You know, that day when you got out from behind the counter and you went out and helped that person get through the doorway, that was great. That showed compassion on the part of the county, and so you know, that sort of thing, keep it up. That's how you make positive things. here in the performance evaluation. Some common evaluation errors is the halo and horn effect, and I know most of us have this in our psyche, that we kind of separate people into good and bad. There's good people, there's bad people. There's not a lot of room in the middle. They're just okay. Try not to let this happen when you're talking about a person's performance, that because overall they're not performing the way you'd like to, don't let that drive you to talking to them as if they're really not doing anything well. Likewise, if it's someone that you like and they do a few things well, you still need to let them know the areas that they can do better in. Because I know there are those types of employees out there. I mean, I've had employees over the years that I like the person. They're a nice person and they work, they do a pretty good job. But because they do a pretty good job and I like them, when I get to the performance appraisal, sometimes I'm not pushing them as much as I should. Understand what I'm saying? Recency, we talked about a little bit. Don't let the performance appraisal be the last 3 weeks of the stuff that you can remember. It needs to be the whole period since the last time that you talked with this employee. Bias. This is coming out in subjective reviews. If the performance appraisal isn't objective, we're using the job description, the tasks that are listed on the job description as the basis, and we let it be subjective. Do I think you're doing a good job or not? Then biases can come out. A bias that I've recognized that I have is I'm not thrilled about millennials. They're difficult for me. And they may be difficult for some of you too. And I really have to work at that bias going into performance appraisal, and I have to look at, it doesn't matter how they got to the result, that I may have a problem with the way they got to the result. If they got to the result and they did the task that's required of them for the organization, then they should, their performance appraisal should show that they've done a good job. All right? So watch out for those different biases. There's lots of different ones out there that we can have. Strictness. And again, some of this comes from the bias. Don't be overly strict with someone, again, if they are getting the performance done, but they're misstepping on a couple of small little technicalities. Make sure that if you're going to be strict, make sure that it's not because of a bias or the halo and horn effect. Okay? Or leniency. So it goes both ways. Just because you like them, they're a great person, you know that they do a lot of volunteer work in the community and things, they're a wonderful person that way, that doesn't mean that you should be more lenient with them if they are underperforming or if they can do better and need to do better. And central tendency is just where, again, if you're one of those that just wants to get this done, I'm doing all 5 of them today, I'm not giving more than 15 minutes for any of them, and they're all just going to get 4s. Because that's what I got time to put, that's how much time I have to put into this. That's central tendency. Not everybody's the same. So don't let yourself get caught in that trap. Okay? Planning for again, review the performance with each employee on a regular basis. So how many of you just do it when Mary tells you you have to have it done once a year? How many of you do it regularly when it's not even necessary, but you sit them down and talk to them about their performance? I think you'll find as you start getting better at it, the more you do it, the better you'll get at it. And when we talk about performance coach or counseling in the next session, I think you'll find that it doesn't need to be a full-out performance appraisal. We can deal with one issue, one item, one goal. Yes.
I had a new employee, and so they have a 6-month goal. And Roxanne said, you don't have to wait 6 months. If you see something, have a goal setting, or talk to them about it halfway along. And that really helped me, because I had some issues, and so I didn't have to wait till the 6 months and say, I could say, well, this is where you are right now, and this is where I would like you to be in 3 more months, or something like that. So that did help.
Yes.
When you could.
And that's especially important in that.
And it's important to them too,
Yes.
because then they say, oh, okay, now I need to step this up a little bit, or I'm doing all right with this, I'm going to work on this, or something like that. So that did help me when I did do that.
Because again, especially with new employees and new employees that haven't had a lot of experience in the workplace before, they have no idea what's expected of them. So to give them no feedback on how they're doing in those first couple of months is really missing the boat. Because they need it, they really want it, and we shouldn't expect that they're just going to figure it out.
Yeah.
It's amazing to me what some new employees don't know. A while back, we hired a communications specialist that had graduated college in communications. About the 3rd week on the job, my CFO walks into the copier room, and there he is staring at the copier. He had never made a copy. He had no idea how to run the copier. Graduated in communications. No idea how to run a copier. But we didn't train him on how to use the copier. We'll talk about that when we get to orientation. We just assumed that he'd know how to make a copy, because we all know how to make a copy, right? But he'd never worked in an office environment before. So it's very important. And that probationary period, that now we like to call the introductory period, because they're not on probation, right? Probation is, and plaintiff's attorneys will make an issue of this, well, so they were on probation. So this is their job, they just have to not screw up, and they get the job, right? No, it's an introductory period to determine whether or not it's a good fit. If they fit with the organization, and if the organization is right for them. Because during that introductory period, they are more or less an at-will employee. You can see they aren't making it, you can let them go. Once they're done with that introductory period, as a government employee, they have a property right in their employment. And you can't let them go unless you have cause. Big difference. Which means you have to have all the documentation that they knew that they were performing substandard, or they did something that was a violation of something in the personnel policy before you can discipline them or let them go. So that, yeah, the introductory period is really important to be open and regularly sitting down with them. Okay. Document the employee's performance throughout the year, provide feedback to employees throughout the rating period, and review objectives at appropriate follow-up intervals. And by the time we get to lunch, you're going to have a really good idea and have about whether or not you want to start doing more sit-downs rather than waiting for the big sit-down. Okay, just as review, SMARTS is specific, measurable, attainable, results-oriented, and time-phased, stretched goals. I'm not going to make you sit in groups and develop SMARTS goals. If we were just doing a couple of sessions today, we might do that, but we're not going to do that this morning. So, questions on the conducting the performance review? And there are some pieces that are in the performance counseling piece and conflict resolution pieces that work here too, but I'm not going to repeat them twice. a long enough day already. So we'll get to them when we get to performance counseling, okay? All right. Let me see. Should we take 5? Let's be back at 5:02. Starting at 5:02.